Welcome to our Nucleus GitHub demo. Today I'm going to be talking about what GitHub is in relation to the Nucleus platform, how we use it for from a security perspective to do vulnerability management effectively, specifically in an AppSec environment where maybe you have to do CI/CD really well and you have to build security and vulnerability management into an SDLC pipeline, so that you can start shifting left and fix vulnerabilities before they make it to production. And then also just measure progress, right? A big problem and challenge that we're trying to solve here is just being able to measure vulnerability management progress across the different stages of your software development lifecycle, and being able to do that at scale in a really easy way. One of the ways that we accomplish this is by partnering with great solutions like GitHub. And today I want to walk you through the Nucleus GitHub integration so that you can really see the power of consolidating your vulnerability management stack into a single place, so that you can start automating workflows outside of just the SDLC and really start making meaningful change in your environment when it comes to your vulnerability management processes. So we're going to jump right in, and we're going to start by looking at GitHub, right? Because GitHub is where all of your data actually starts out being stored. It's where it's generated. So when you think about GitHub, right, it's your repository. It's the place where all of your repositories live. So we're right now plugged into the Nucleus Security GitHub account, and you can see all of our different repositories and code repositories that we have. You can see we've got 14 repositories, we've got projects, we've got teams, we've got a whole bunch of people. So you can see we've got a bunch of teams here built into our GitHub. And this is important because when you're trying to start ingesting data into a platform like Nucleus, you need to be able to segment what data you'd like to get ingested and where. I'd also like to note that from a security perspective, we have Dependabot, code scanning, and secret scanning enabled in our environment. So we've got a bunch of vulnerability alerts from Dependabot, codeQL, and secrets scanning, right? So what's great about GitHub is that they make it really easy to embed security into your development cycle, right? So you're automatically getting your Dependabot alerts, you're automatically getting codeQL scans, and you're automatically getting secret scanning happening. Now, the challenge here is that in order to review your data, it's a bit of a challenge, and it's not really embedded with any of your other scans that you're doing, right? Specifically in like cloud environments, or if you're doing container image pushes all the time. And so you have to do scanning across different layers of the tech stack. But what's awesome here is that you could go in and you could see all of the security vulnerabilities associated with your with your each individual repository, right? Now, you want to get that into a bigger system. And the way that we do that in Nucleus is actually pretty straightforward. We do two things, but we have this concept that we call a connector, and then we use that connector to ingest data of your choosing. So the way that you do that in Nucleus is you go to the project administration connector setup page, like you would normally do when you set up any of the connectors that are built into the Nucleus library. Now, reminder, we integrate with all sorts of different tools. GitHub's not the only one, but GitHub is one of our best partnerships that we have, and is one of our most supported integrations. Now, when you set up an integration with GitHub, it actually installs a GitHub app into your GitHub organization. So the way that we do that is we actually make it really easy. We try to make it a one-click install, where Nucleus does all of the heavy lifting for you and configures everything. All you have to do is actually click the install GitHub app button, and then it will take care of the rest. And then once that's set up, you'll see that it shows up in your GitHub list here, right? So you have your GitHub app, Nucleus customer example organization. So what's happened here is we've installed this GitHub app into the Nucleus customer example organization, right? So in here, we're looking at our Nucleus security organization, but we're gonna ingest actually a different organization called Nucleus customer example. Now, once we do that, all you have to do to get data flowing, you've configured the connection. Then you just have to go to import via connector, because we're importing a connector. We're ingesting from the GitHub app. And then from there, you'll notice that you get to start picking what kind of data you'd like to ingest. Do we want to ingest code scan alerts? Do we want to ingest Dependabot? It's really up to you. So you select one of those, and then as soon as you select one of those, you say, oh, great. Now, what do I want to ingest? Do I want to ingest by repository? Do I want to ingest by team? Or do I just want to ingest everything? Let's just go in and we'll look, hey, let's see all the repositories that we're using that have codeQL scans. So here we are, we could go in and we can see, hey, these are all of the repositories that we have available to us across different types of languages. You can expand that. You can see all of the analyses that have ever been done. And then you could go in and see all the rules that were triggered, all of that sort of fun stuff you would expect. But I could go in and I could say, hey, show me all of my teams that I have in my GitHub environment. And then same thing for Dependabot, right? So with Dependabot, I can ingest by repository or I can ingest everything. Now, the beauty of this is that if I select all, imagine that I'm in a dynamic environment where I'm pushing and creating new repositories all the time, or I'm deleting repositories out of our GitHub account. What all does is it actually syncs directly from your GitHub account to Nucleus. So what's happening is that you're able to ingest basically and pick up any changes to your GitHub account, and Nucleus will pick that up automatically. So the all is really the easy button that allows you to just say, hey, we just want to import everything from GitHub, and how often do we want to do that? We want to import continuously every hour, let's say, right? And then you just go in, you click save and finish. I'm just going to click monthly here. And then I need to select a schedule date because that's what you're supposed to do. Let's go ahead and pick this in the future because I already ingested some stuff. Let's go midnight on August 31st. And there we go. We've scheduled our scans to ingest. Now you could go in and you could see that schedule in the connector activity page here. I'm not going to dive into that though, but just at FYI. Now, once the data has been ingested, it should ingest really quickly. It's really straightforward. What happens after that, after the data starts to get ingested is we start to build an asset inventory out of that system, right? So Nucleus will automatically build you an asset inventory. An asset to Nucleus is just any object that can have a vulnerability associated with it. So most often that's code repositories and branch combinations in a repository environment, but it could also be a VM. It could be a load balancer with multiple IPs. It could be a container image, could be a running container, could be a dynamic web application URL. Anything of that nature is what we consider an asset. And then we will build and deduplicate all of the data that's coming in from any of these external systems, and then we'll build an asset inventory out of it. And you'll see that we actually associate your different scanner types or source types from these different systems onto individual assets. So you'll notice really quickly that we have one code repository on the master branch that has been scanned by codeQL and Dependabot. And so it allows you to really quickly and easily see what's been scanned, what has been scanned by which tools. And then I could go in and I could see and I could filter and obviously answer all of those questions that I have about that. And then we'll get to asset groups here in a second. One other thing to note here is that we have this scan coverage bar at the top. So scan coverage is basically how many of my assets have been scanned. So the red bar here is how many assets have not ever been scanned. So that allows you to have that compliance associated with are we scanning everything before it gets into production? You could filter by master branch. You could filter by has it been scanned, and then you can answer that question, right? Gets all the answers that you're looking for from that compliance perspective, specifically in an SDLC. Now, when I click into an asset, you'll notice that we have a dashboard that's specifically designed to tell you about an individual asset. And so you can see that this asset here is it's a Git repository. It's WebGoat Legacy is the name of the repository. We have the revision. We have the branch. So we have all the information you would expect. And then from there, we actually pull in all of the data from GitHub. So what's great about this is that you actually can go in and you can see all of the individual information from GitHub about the repository. So in Nucleus, we call this additional metadata. Now, to us, additional metadata is any custom fields from any external system. So if you were, for example, you had this repository stored in GitHub, but you were also importing it from, say, checkmarks, if you were doing multiple scans, you would actually get your GitHub repo information here, and you would get your checkmarks custom field information here as well. And then you'd be able to use any of these fields in any of the automation or reporting or filtering downstream. So Nucleus has a templating language that allows you to access any of these fields elsewhere in the app. So you could go in and you could say, hey, I actually want to go in and I want to build a query that shows me all of my master branches from GitHub. And so you can actually build an asset group, or you could build a filter, or you could build a report that just looks at master branches across all of your different repositories, right? It's just one basic example, but you could do that across everything, right? So it allows you to get access to all of that information that you would want dynamically from an analytics and reporting point of view. Now, obviously, the next piece is to associate all of your vulnerabilities with the assets, right? So you can see here, we've got a whole bunch of vulnerabilities that came from Dependabot and from codeQL, and you can see all of the scans that have ever been done on the specific asset. So you can see, for example, the master branch over time. Excuse me, you can see all of the vulnerabilities on a single branch over time, and that allows you to go in and say, great, I could go in and I could see all the vulnerability because I can see the scan history and I can see everything that I want about this individual asset. So having the asset information is all well and good, right? We are able to dig into assets, individual code repositories and branches, and see all of the vulnerabilities, all of the metadata about individual assets. Now, the real power of the platform and the main use case that most of our customers are utilizing Nucleus for within an AppSec environment or an AppSec use case is something that Nucleus, we call it asset groups. But asset groups are really just generic collections of assets that you can put together to represent something bigger than each individual code repository. So if we're looking at a microservices environment, for example, a code repository is not an application. An application is actually made up of multiple microservices or multiple code repositories. And so what Nucleus allows you to do is to represent applications or teams or anything else that you want from a business context into a single object within Nucleus that then assumes all of the vulnerabilities from all the assets within it. And so it allows you to be able to look at vulnerabilities at it from a different lens. And so just as an example of that, let's dig into this managing directors asset group, and you can see that it nests down. We've got multiple managing directors. This managing director, Scott Smith, has multiple teams underneath him. And you can see that he has this application called the accounting app, which is within his remit. So when you click into accounting app, you'll see that this accounting app actually is made up of a whole bunch of different assets, right? So some code repositories, some container images, some hosts. And so you can go in and you can see really, really quickly that all of these code repositories are being made up, are making up one app that then is being used for all of your analytics, all of your reporting, all of your automation. Now, we also have the ability to automatically migrate assets between groups and all those things from a management and scalability perspective, but I'm not going to cover that today. Just note that is possible. But the thing that's important about this is that we have this concept of an accounting app, right? This accounting app then is made up of these 16 assets, 6 code repositories or microservices, 1 container image, and then 15 of them are externally facing, which is good and interesting to know. Now, the thing that's important is that when I go to our project dashboard, we have a ton of data. We have a ton of different pages within Nucleus and a ton of different ways of slicing and dicing your information. But when I actually look at the project dashboard and I filter by accounting app here, I can actually now, I'm looking in the context of this accounting app. So when I'm looking at my risk scores, when I'm looking at all of my high risk vulnerability information and widgets, when I'm looking at my vulnerabilities by source, all of this is actually based on those assets that are in that app. So I'm actually looking at all of the attributes specifically for that application. So this is my global view, right? And then if I wanted to, again, filter back into that, this filter is actually going to follow me around my Nucleus console. And so now I am just browsing all of my high-level metrics from this specific application view. So if I go to my active vulnerabilities page, for example, these are going to be all of the vulnerabilities specifically for this accounting app. So you can see I've got 66 unique critical vulnerabilities, 106 instances. And now I'm looking specifically at that context of all of my vulnerabilities in one particular place. And this is really important because the important thing is to get the right information to the right users in the right context. So for example, if I'm a developer and I own this application, and that application is synced to specifically to my one Jira project, I need to be able to get all of that kind of set up and running and then working in my context. So I, as a developer, need this visibility into my critical vulnerabilities, and I may be using tools beyond GitHub, or I may be using some self-grown tools, but I need a central place where I can consolidate all of my scans on my application together. Specifically, if I'm working with other teams, and we need to be able to look and get the right information with the right at the right level, and I need to know what I own, which is another piece of this as well, right? I'm a Scrum team and I own all of the vulnerabilities within a specific application. This is how I can really easily see all of the vulnerabilities that I own across my repositories, right? It's not just one repository. It's I need to fix vulnerabilities across an application potentially, not just a single microservice. So it allows flexibility in how you present the information to your development teams, but also reporting across application, not just at that repository level. Now, that's all great. But the other thing that's important here to note here is that we actually have this context of threat intelligence and prioritization, right? So I'm a developer. I come into Nucleus, and all of this data is filtered to what I am contextually supposed to see, right, based on the application that I own. And I go in and I'm allowed to look at any of this vulnerability information in Nucleus, everything from pen tests to our Dependabot results. But let's go in and let's click into a vulnerability. Now, when I look at a vulnerability in Nucleus, the idea here is that you should not have to refer back to the scanning console to make your changes, right? You want to be able to go in and get all of the information so that I can use this data with flexibility. And then at the same time, this is also connective tissue between your repositories and your tickets, right? Because I want to be able to create tickets back into GitHub, or sometimes we're using Jira, or maybe different teams are using different systems for that. And so this allows you to provide that exact set of data and connect it to whatever your ticketing system that you're using as well, between the bidirectional ticketing systems that Nucleus provides. But you'll notice that we have a whole set of dashboards here around description and solution, but we also have we have a timeline of everything that's ever happened on this vulnerability as well. Now, for my application, for this vulnerability, only one thing's happened, and a due date has been set in Nucleus so that we can track against our SLAs and our company policies around how quickly we want to fix production level vulnerabilities. And then obviously all of the information from GitHub as well. And then when I dig into the instance, you can see that the specific location where this vulnerability exists, right? So it gets really deep of all the information that a user could want. And then there's all of the tracking capabilities within Nucleus as well, right? So you have the ability to set statuses, to set due dates, create tickets, assign to teams. So for example, right, like maybe I, as the development team, or the specific developer that is responsible for this application, maybe there are specific people on the team that we want to create or to make the fix. And so we have the ability to track and manage all of that within Nucleus as well, so that we have all of those great metrics for tracking our Scrum process, for tracking our our Kanban boards, right? So there's not a lot of information. It's very difficult to grab information out of a traditional Kanban process or a Scrum process when it comes to vulnerabilities, because everything is based on on all of your different types of issues, and you don't necessarily want a different workflow, a development workflow for different types of issues. And so Nucleus allows you to track and look at metrics across different types of vulnerabilities within applications, so you get better metrics around for your retros, and to really show progress and to show what you are doing as a development team. Are we introducing more vulnerabilities over time? Are we introducing less vulnerabilities over time? Are we fixing more vulnerabilities? How long is it taking us to fix vulnerabilities on average? All those types of pieces of information are very difficult to get out of a Scrum tool or a development tool. And so those types of metrics that you can measure and track are really great for your vulnerability or your Scrum process and your vulnerability management process. Now, the other thing that's cool here that's really neat is we actually associate threat intelligence with SCA results. So what's really neat about this, or what's interesting, is that when you think of threat intelligence, you normally think of network security vulnerabilities, and what you're trying to do is you're trying to look at the external threat landscape and associate that with your with vulnerabilities, because you're trying to say, hey, what types of threat actors, what are they doing to different vulnerabilities, and try to exploit them in the wild, and how does that affect us? And now there's a big challenge with that, where most organizations struggle with associating that with their environment. But what Nucleus does is we take that threat data and we associate it with vulnerabilities in your environment, so that you know that these are specific sets of vulnerability information that matters to us, because we are affected by these vulnerabilities. And then after we know that we're affected by the vulnerabilities is when we go and we associate the threat data to it. Now, what we do with that, which is really neat, is we give access to all of those fields to the user, right? So we've got a whole bunch of filtering information here. I'm just building pulling up the filter page just so that you can see it really easily. But you can see that we have a bunch of information that we're building in from Mandiant. So you can see if you've got 0 days in there. You can see the risk rating, if they've done any risk ratings. You can see associated malware, threat actors, EPSS scores, the CISA BOD, also known as the CISA KEV list. You have all that type of information to see, are we affected by any of this data that has some threat information associated with it. So when you're thinking about prioritizing what to fix, let's just look at our one application here that only had like 16 assets associated with it, right? But you got 814 unique vulnerabilities, and all of those have multiple instances, or most of them have multiple instances. So when you're looking at what to fix, we've got how many criticals? 66 criticals. So when you're trying to figure out from a prioritization perspective, specifically as a product owner, you're like, what do we need to fix? How do we need to fix it? Why do we need to fix it? There's a whole bunch of criteria that you want to use to figure that out, right? There's the asset context, which is business criticality of the asset. There's is it publicly facing or not, sensitivity of the data on that asset, which you again can tune, and you can see that in Nucleus, right? So just to highlight there that you can actually tune that and see, you can tune the risk prioritization within Nucleus on that. But on top of that, you want to be able to say, hey, do we have something that has been labeled a critical risk by threat feeds as well? Do we want to know anything that's got malware associated with it? Do we want to fix something that's been exploited in the wild? Because if I've got 66 criticals and you're only able to fix 20 per sprint, because that's just, you've got business requirements, you've got other things that you're thinking about, you need to be able to figure out which ones do we want to fix first. And then we want to also be able to start bundling vulnerabilities together to say, hey, one fix is actually going to fix multiple vulnerabilities, which is what the idea in the context of a unique vulnerability is within Nucleus. And so it allows you to start being smarter about how you work as a development team. And as a product owner, I could come in here and I could say, hey, well, I'm just going to work off all of the vulnerabilities that 1, 2, 3, the ones that affect me the most. Now, we have it all bundled together in this context here on the active vulnerabilities page, but there's a second view which will be useful for teams as they're trying to prioritize within this context of critical. And then we call that the top risks page. So the top risks page is where we take all that, we say, hey, based on all the information that we have between threat intel and your asset context and your vulnerability context, what are actually your highest risk vulnerabilities that you should fix? And then this is meant to be like a task list where you could say, hey, if we only fix 10 vulnerabilities, pick these 10 vulnerabilities, and then work your way down the list as on a per application basis. What's going to have the highest impact and the highest return on investment to allow you to make smarter decisions around what to fix. And something to think here that's just something that we see often is being able to bundle things together that you're already working on. So for example, if I'm already working on, let's use this polymorphic vulnerability here, this XML Jackson data bind. So if I'm already, I can line this up so I can say, hey, if I'm already going to be making changes to code that uses this Jackson core data binds library, then I can actually go in, and their studies and statistics show that it costs way less overall, and it's way more efficient to actually upgrade packages and to do that as part of your standard development lifecycle as opposed to having to do it just from a pure reactionary security perspective. So there's ways and strategies that you can build around this information to help you figure out what types of things you're actually going to build and how you're going to achieve those business outcomes that you're looking for. So, you know, I've been talking a lot today, but in summation, and kind of to put a little cap on this, obviously Nucleus does a whole bunch of stuff. There's a whole bunch of stuff on top of everything that I've talked about. But this is just going through one individual kind of workflow within the Nucleus platform that revolves around getting GitHub set up, to being able to ingest the data, to understanding what it means, being able to organize it, and then being able to do information, to do with that information all of the workflows that you need. So at a high level, we're doing three things, right? And these are the three things I'd like you to kind of understand or to take away from this. The first is that you want a unified view of all of your vulnerabilities across all of your assets and all of your applications. So the context of being able to say vulnerabilities associated with applications, and applications are actually made up of multiple repositories. That's one really solid use case that we see over and over again when it comes to the Nucleus platform, is to be able to say, here are all of my vulnerabilities for the accounting app versus all of my vulnerabilities across everything. That's number one. The second is getting the right information to the right people. So being able to say this team owns this application, therefore this team is going to get assigned these vulnerabilities automatically, and having a single place where that development team or product management team or whoever you want to be logging into the platform can go and see all of their vulnerabilities across all of their tools that affect all of the assets within their app. That is another piece of what we're doing here. And then the third part is, once you've been able to do those two things, is to be able to say, well, that's awesome. Now we want to prioritize within the context of what I own. So it's great. I own this application. I have 1,000 vulnerabilities. Which ones do I need to fix first? What are the highest bang for buck? How do I do that? And you do that through asset context. You do that through business context, and then you can do that through some additional threat intelligence type information as well, and then some economies of scale decisions that you need to make as a business, which you can build around the Nucleus platform through the triaging of issues within here, through our bidirectional integrations with ticketing systems, and through any other of our integrations that we provide.